The reason inhabitants abandoned this prehistoric site may disturb you. It certainly unsettled me. Hi all, I'm Geology Joes, your friendly neighborhood geologist with a fascination with the macabre. I recently went on a week-long trip exploring ancient Native American sites, and upon my return and research learned something disturbing. If you want to know what that is, join me on this week's geology adventure. It's so freaking cold. But it's pretty. But it's freaking cold. But you know what? We're going to a hot spring today, so it doesn't matter. This morning, I was freezing when I woke up, so I packed up as quickly as possible to chase the warmth, which was not difficult to find here. Man, I really wish I had some gloves right now. It is so cold. It has to be like in the 30s because my hands are... You can see how red they're getting. It's so cold. I did not think about gloves at all. I also didn't plan to be up here in elevation at all. But my body feels warm. Sick. I have like 10 new patches to put on the jacket. So I'm gonna fill this baby up in no time. The area around the Jemez Mountains and Bandelier National Forest was once volcanically active. Today the volcanoes are dormant but could erupt once again. Like many volcanic zones, hot springs sprinkle the landscape, but here you can find them in the mountains. Fingers crossed that there is no one at the hot springs, or very, very few people. At least just one spot for me. I got here at the absolute perfect time because maybe like 10 minutes after I arrived, the parking lot was full. Going to some hot springs, going to some hot springs. A raven. Ooh, it is nice and toasty in here. And there's a spider web. Yeah, it is, oh yeah, my camera's already plugged. You go there and back, or? After the hot spring hike, my plan was to drive straight to Flagstaff, Arizona. But I took a quick detour because of something amazing on the side of the road. This is Soda Dam. This 300-foot long, 50-foot high and wide natural dam has formed over thousands of years. A thermal mineral spring bubbles up at this point, depositing calcium carbonate and travertine. Unfortunately, due to construction of Route 4, a portion of the Soda Dam was destroyed, disrupting the natural plumbing. This disruption has caused the slow disintegration of the dam, halting its 7,000-year-old construction. This river that flows over the dam aids in its erosion. New Mexico is not the only state that has seen significant volcanism, resulting in hot springs, interesting geological formations, and an opportune environment for indigenous peoples. Arizona has its fair share of volcanoes as well. There are many volcanic vents in and around Flagstaff, and by many, I mean upwards of 600 volcanoes within an 1,800 square mile radius, ranging in age from 6 million years old to just under 1,000 years old. The baby of the group is known as Sunset Crater. Sunset Crater erupted between 1040 and 1100 CE, sending thick sheets of lava into the valley below and tearing the earth apart into deep fissures. Sunset Crater is a cinder cone, a volcano known for its explosivity. It forced nearby indigenous communities to relocate, leaving their homes and land they had cultivated for at least 400 years. It's likely that people in close proximity were running from rivers of molten lava and choked on thick clouds of ash which fell within a 140 square mile radius, and inevitably led to crop failures and likely starvation. However, the ash improved the soil in some areas, and in the decades that followed the eruption, people spread to areas known as Walnut Canyon and Wapatki. The first of these sites I visited was Walnut Canyon. Walnut Canyon was not actually empty when people began moving around 1100 CE. An artifact found in the canyon indicates use of the area starting 10,000 to 6,000 years ago. Nestled within the sheer walls of Walnut Canyon, the inhabitants had a form of passive defense and line-of-sight communication, common in most villages at the time. The stair-step nature of the canyon offered a convenient framework for dwellings. The top, layered portion of the canyon is made up of the Kaibab limestone, and the steep walls found toward the middle of the canyon are made up of the Toroweap Formation. The Kaibab contains alternating layers of salt-silty limestone which erodes easily, giving rise to cave-like formations, which the indigenous people used to their advantage. The overhangs provided a leak-proof ceiling, natural insulation, and a natural back wall and floor. All they had to do was lay and plaster unshaped blocks of limestone for sidewalls and enclose the front, leaving a small space for a door. There are more than 300 rooms like this within the canyon. Most of the rooms were actually not used to house people. They were used as storage for tools, food, and water. Water storage was incredibly important in this canyon, where water flows intermittently during the spring snowmelt and summer monsoons. Canyon geology actually helped the inhabitants by prolonging water availability through potholes, which are carved by eddies during monsoon season. But they still had to make sure they had plenty of water for the dry months when the water in those potholes evaporated. Imagine carrying heavy clay pots up and down the steep canyon walls to collect water from the creek on the canyon floor. I barely made it up the 240 concrete steps with my almost empty backpack. I couldn't imagine scaling hundreds of feet down the slippery cliff sides, but game trails, side canyons, and hand-built graded switchbacks made this difficult task more manageable. The community also hunted and gathered together, as well as attended to crops along the canyon rim. Unfortunately, the climate of Walnut Canyon became drier and colder through the years, leading to crop failures. I imagine this was a very stressful and uncertain time for the hundreds of people living in Walnut Canyon. People most likely had to ration what little food they had, leading to nutrient deficiency, disease, and starvation. And like in any stressful time, there was likely conflict over resources, which, among the other reasons mentioned, inevitably forced people out by 1250. Though it was difficult to find information outside of the visitor center related to these issues, there has been more published research on the next site I visited, and somewhat disturbing research at that. Wapatki National Monument covers 56 square miles of desert prairie land just north of Flagstaff, Arizona. It's hard to believe this desolate landscape was once home to thousands of Puebloans, but at one time there were 100 sites per square mile, 10 to 20% of those being used for domiciles year-round. How was it so productive here? Natural fires routinely spread, sustaining healthy grasslands and habitat for wildlife, which provided a reliable food source for people who settled here. For thousands of years, hunters would have been seen tracking mammoths, antelope, rabbits. Ancestral Hopi farmers would have been tending to crops, and Navajo shepherds would have been grazing sheep. Unlike the Pueblos we saw in my last video that were made of volcanic rock, most of the Pueblos in this area were made of limestone and sandstone, which were more readily available. Like the Pueblos and Bandelier National Monument, the front door was actually located on the ceiling and windows were almost non-existent. An interesting thing about many of the pueblos is that they were built on the rims of volcanic fissures. But why? There is no evidence that there was a stream close by to be used as a water source, so farming was dependent on rainfall. Where is rain likely to collect? In depressions. So fissures were likely a good place to plant crops because water and silt would collect there. Prehistoric check dams can actually be found at the bottom of some of the fissures, which contained runoff. The Sunset Crater volcano would have also been active while the Anasazi lived here, covering the sandy soil with nutrient-dense, moisture-retaining cinders and ash, aiding in productivity. In modern Puebloan culture, ritual and prayer are inseparable from farming tradition. It's likely their ancestors also had prayers and rituals to evoke rain in this dry environment, which historically has ranged from 4 to 14 inches per year. When rain did not come, they had to walk 10 miles to the Little Colorado drainage to fill their clay pots. I thought hiking to the bottom of a canyon was bad. This was probably worse. But the Puebloans made it work and built impressive structures, one of those being the famous Wapatki Pueblo, which consisted of 100 rooms, a tower, a community room, and a ceremonial ball court. Between 1100 and 1200 CE, more people lived here than ever before and since. Wapatki was perfectly situated for trade between large populations to the northeast and south. Because of this, a complex society of several thousand emerged, and Wapatki became a ceremonial center and landmark, attracting immigrants from other villages and tribes. This community would have had a social hierarchy, with clan elders being the leaders and decision-makers. These leaders most likely made their homes in Wapatki Pueblo, while others lived in surrounding pueblos. It's hard to imagine the fall of a big, prosperous village like this. The reason the Puebloans departed is uncertain, but tree ring evidence indicates a period of lengthy drought between 1160 and 1260 CE, resulting in a landscape barren of vegetation and likely animals, possibly leading to circumstances similar to Walnut Canyon inhabitants. But evidence collected at a pueblo called Tragedy House suggests something more sinister occurred. One researcher describes the abandonment was caused by increased chaos and social pathology, among other reasons. Researchers examined 2 assemblages of human skeletal remains from the Wapatki National Monument. 19 individuals were examined from room 59 in the Wapatki Pueblo, and a minimum of 5 individuals from the House of Tragedy in Big Hawk Valley. The individuals from Wapatki Pueblo appear to have died from an epidemic and were rapidly buried. The researchers speculate that this pueblo was likely abandoned soon after this burial because scavenging animals were able to disturb the graves, resulting in damage to the bones indicative of carnivores. These remains found in room 59 are distinctive from those uncovered in Tragedy House, but paint a larger picture of what may have happened here centuries ago. At Tragedy House, the researchers found evidence of cannibalism. This evidence includes butchering marks, smashed long bones, and unceremonious abandonment of the dead. But this is not a first. Intentionally damaged human skeletal remains indicating cannibalism and violence have been found at more than 40 archaeological sites across Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. Most of these bone assemblages were found in Anasazi sites. The earliest evidence of cannibalism date around 900 AD, and the latest around 1700 AD. The average date for these sites was around 1100 AD, possibly indicating significant social change during this era that may permit the consumption of human flesh. Explanations for prehistoric Southwest cannibalism include starvation, social pathology, and as a violent form of institutionalized social control. The evidence of cannibalism at Wapatki has been highly contested amongst the scientific community, and it is certainly a taboo topic that not many want to delve into. Historically, archaeology has been viewed through an ethnocentric lens, giving rise to misinterpretations. So it is hard to say what really caused the Puebloans to abandon their homes, and if cannibalism had anything to do with it. But the research that exists is certainly compelling. Well, that's all I have for today. Next week, I'll dive into another spooky subject that may get me in trouble. We'll see.